I snuck into the company's private party and caught my wife kissing the boss. When they saw me, they were speechless. The boss said, "How did you get in here?" I said, "That's the least of my worries, wait for me." I left, planning a divorce that would shake everyone up. And at that moment, when she still had her lips marked by another man, her hands where they should never be, her eyes wide open in front of me, that was when I understood with absolute clarity that there was nothing left to be saved, that everything we had built together for years, the nightly bedtime conversations, the lazy Sundays on the couch, the birthdays celebrated over simple dinners, the dreams of a shared old age, had all been dissolved at the exact moment she allowed herself to love a stranger more than she respected a home. I left there with my blood boiling, my chest on fire, the dry look of someone who would not beg for explanations. And they were paralyzed. Not even a word of regret or an apology crossed the air. Only the cowardly silence of someone who was discovered at the height of pleasure and lies. But what no one knew was that I was no longer that ordinary, inconspicuous, predictable man. I had enough reasons not to explode there, reasons that would make all that betrayal seem small compared to what was to come. Because while they were drowning in hidden glances and touches, I was preparing a world to collapse, and that world was theirs. What that boss didn't know, what that woman didn't imagine, was that I knew every flaw within that company. Every doctored number, every misappropriated budget, every forged signature on contracts that should never have existed. For years, I closed my eyes out of convenience, to maintain the stability of my married and professional life. But all it took was one kiss, one misplaced kiss, for everything to change. And what hurt the most wasn't the kiss itself, it was the way she smiled after it. As if she had gotten rid of a weight. As if I were the hindrance. As if I was truly worthless anymore. On the way back home, every image of that scene played on a loop in my mind. Her holding his face with an intimacy I hadn't seen in a long time, his hands on her waist as if that body were already conquered territory. The muffled laughter of a colleague, the sound of ice in the whiskey glasses, the loud music drowning out the sound of my uneven breathing. And then, my voice. Firm, low, threatening. Wait for me. They didn't even know what to run away from. They didn't know that the problem of me having come in without an invitation was the least of their problems. Because the real problem would be to leave there as if nothing had happened. As if they weren't about to witness the collapse of everything they thought they controlled. I didn't go home that night. I went to the office. I went through folders, emails, spreadsheets. I knew where to look. And each click on the computer was like ripping out a thread of dignity from that man, and from her too. Because, yes, she knew. She knew what he did. She knew how he operated. She knew and she never told me. Because it wasn't just a betrayal of the body, it was of values, of complicity, of principles. Meanwhile, she was probably laughing in some hotel room paid for with corporate funds, thinking she had chosen the winner. Thinking she had traded a predictable husband for a powerful lover. But what she didn't know was that the rug would be pulled out from under her, and when she fell, there would be no one to catch her. Days later, everything began to fall apart. Anonymous complaints emerged. Internal investigations were opened. His name appeared in internal reports as someone potentially responsible for tax fraud. And her. She began to be seen as an accomplice. The smiles changed. The invitations disappeared. The looks became judgmental. Friends began to drift away. The security of her position was shaken. The image she had cultivated as an elegant, honest and admired woman turned to dust in a matter of weeks. Meanwhile, I just watched. Silently. With the serenity of someone who knows that time takes its toll, and takes its toll with high interest. She looked for me. Tried to talk. She said she was sorry, that it was a mistake, that I was the love of her life, that she got confused. That he made her feel alive, but she soon realized that it wasn't love, that it was just an impulse, a need. That she was willing to try, to go back, to rebuild. But I had already crossed another bridge. There was no turning back. The pain she gave me was fuel, and on that path I found a new life. A new love. Someone who looked at me without secrets, who touched me with truth, who knew how to see the man I am and not what I could offer. There was no more room for belated regrets. In the end, she lost everything. The position, the prestige, the respect and, above all, me. And perhaps the most painful thing for her was realizing that I was okay. That I moved on. That there was no more resentment, just indifference. That the man she once took for granted was now an unattainable stranger. And the boss? Well, he was dishonorably discharged. Responding legally for serious irregularities. And even so, when she saw me holding hands with another woman, when she noticed my serene smile, my peaceful eyes, she still tried to get closer, still looked for a space in that new story that didn't belong to her. But all I did was smile. A smile from someone who knows that, as cruel as it may seem, some betrayals are necessary. Because they show us who was by our side, and who, in fact, was just walking along until they found something more interesting. And the most curious thing about all this, and maybe this is what you still don't understand, is that at the exact moment I left that party, I already knew that I didn't need revenge. I needed freedom. And that's exactly what she gave me, without meaning to. By betraying me, she freed me. But what no one imagines is what I found afterwards. Who I found. And how, without meaning to, she pushed me straight to the greatest love of my life. Do you want to know how it all happened? Because this story is far from over. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support any kind of betrayal, never. The stories told are fictional, but based on painful realities that show how infidelity is capable of destroying homes, hearts and futures. Our goal is clear, to reveal the emotional and moral consequences of betrayal, without romanticizing it. Now take a deep breath. Get ready. Because what you're about to hear next is shocking, intense and unforgettable. Good story. From the beginning, there was something magnetic between Daniel and Lara. They weren't the typical movie couple, the kind that stands out for their statuesque appearance or ostentatious luxury, but there was a harmony between them that caught the attention of those who observed more carefully. They met when they were still young, when their dreams barely had any shape and the future was just a distant concept. He, dedicated and disciplined, already showed signs of a silent ambition, the kind that doesn't shout but persists firmly until it achieves everything it desires. She, intense and perceptive, had a rare sensitivity to details, whether in the aesthetics of a setting, in choosing the right words or in reading the emotions of any situation. They were, above all, accomplices, and perhaps this was the basis that kept them together for so many years. Daniel worked in technology and finance, a natural strategist, one of those who look at numbers as if they were maps of destiny. He spent hours in front of glowing screens, surrounded by spreadsheets and reports, but he never allowed work to completely consume the man he was at home. He woke up early, made his own coffee, enjoyed taking care of the garden on the weekends and still found time for long conversations with Lara on Friday nights, when they would turn off their cell phones and indulge in a glass of wine and reflect on life. There was a ritual there, an intimacy built with care, like someone who cultivates a bonsai for years, pruning carefully, shaping time, respecting silence and celebrating the flowers. Lara, in turn, has always been a woman with a strong presence. Intelligent, articulate and with a discreet beauty, she knew how to move in social environments with enviable naturalness. She worked as a project manager in a multinational company and was constantly praised for her leadership skills and empathy with the team. For her friends, Lara was the one who solved everything, the one who always had advice, the right word, a welcoming gesture. For Daniel, she was the gravitational center of the house, the person who could bring balance even on the most chaotic days. And despite the intense routine, she kept alive the tenderness in her touch, the lightness in her gaze and that almost maternal care with the small gestures that keep a relationship breathing. The couple's marriage has always been seen as solid. They had purchased a spacious house in a quiet neighborhood, with a backyard where Lara grew herbs and Daniel planted rose bushes. To outsiders, they lived a stable, comfortable, even admirable life. They attended her company events together, had lunch with his parents on Sundays, and planned vacations months in advance, with organized itineraries and balanced expectations. There were no major scandals, no outbursts of jealousy, nor episodes of visible distancing. They were the portrait of a mature couple, who learned to negotiate differences and respect each other's silence. But stability also comes at a price. The routine, although serene, sometimes became too predictable. Daniel, in his obsession with security and planning, began to invest more and more time in side projects. He joined the board of an emerging fintech, agreed to attend seminars, and eventually began traveling more. Nothing alarming. They were professional commitments, justifiable, and he always made it clear how much he cared about Lara, even from a distance. I sent messages, I called before bed, I sent unexpected flowers with short but affectionate notes. Lara, on the other hand, never showed dissatisfaction. On the contrary, he always encouraged its growth. He said he was proud of the man he had become. But something in her began to change, imperceptibly, like a crack slowly opening from within, without making a sound. Meetings started to feel longer. Time at home, quieter. Spontaneous laughter is rarer. They still slept together, still had dinner on Saturdays, but her eyes no longer sought his as often. And he, blinded by the trust built over the years, did not notice the signs. He didn't see when the kisses got colder, when the responses became automatic, when the hugs no longer had the same weight. I believed it was just a phase. That time would bring back the enthusiasm. That, as in other times, all it took was a weekend away, a deep conversation, a surprise trip. But this time was different. Lara wasn't just tired. She was restless. And this restlessness had been growing silently, fueled by an absence that wasn't physical, but emotional. She felt that Daniel, although present in gestures, was absent in essence. That his dedication to work had become an escape disguised as ambition. That the flowers he sent hid an emptiness. That the daily calls served more to ease his conscience than to truly connect the two of them. And she, so used to solving everything, began to keep to herself the discomfort, the uneasiness, the feeling of being next to a man who no longer saw her as he used to. In Lara's professional environment, changes were also happening. Her company was undergoing restructuring, and a new CEO had taken over. Young, charismatic, and experienced, he quickly became a central figure in her daily life. Not only because of the strategic decisions that directly impacted the team, but also because of the way he communicated, the way he looked at others, the way he gave discreet compliments, and made everyone feel seen. It was no different with Lara. He noticed her intelligence, her posture, her poise. And between meetings, presentations, and coffee breaks in the hallway, they established a subtle connection, almost invisible to the naked eye, but powerful enough to cause internal turmoil. Lara was not naive. She knew where she was stepping. She knew there was a line between professional and personal, and she managed to stand her ground for a long time. But she was also human. And she was fragile. She felt alone, invisible, lacking something she couldn't name. And when you find yourself in that position, even the most upright people run risks. It was as if, for the first time in years, she was being listened to attentively, looked at with genuine interest, desired not only for what she did, but for who she was. And that confused her. It made her go home with a restless mind and a heavy heart. It made her smile in moments that would previously have been just part of the day. Daniel, on the other hand, continued to believe that everything was going well. He planned surprises, future trips, dreamed of moving house and starting a new stage in his life with his wife, maybe having children, maybe even a shared business of his own. They still had dinner together on Wednesdays. They still shared the same bed. They still laughed, every now and then, at the series they watched on the couch. But between one laugh and another, there were silences that screamed. Lara, with her sensitivity, began to avoid some dialogues. She didn't want to seem distant, but she could no longer pretend to be fulfilled. Daniel, focused on results, began to interpret her silence as common work stress. He never considered another possibility. He was certain that, after so many years together, he knew the woman by his side like the back of his hand. Little did he know that the back of her hand no longer sought his with the same strength. It was a subtle but dangerous scenario. A marriage that, at first glance, seemed solid, but that was slowly falling apart in the cracks of an emotionally neglected routine. And there, in that organized house, between proper dinners and silent mornings, two worlds walked in opposite directions without realizing that the abyss between them grew larger every day. And when that abyss finally revealed itself, nothing would ever be the same again. Time passed like a treacherous breeze, imperceptible and deceptive, until the day when the small deviations became abysses. The signs were there, disguised as routine, camouflaged by the blind trust of those who believe they know the other person to the core. Daniel remained committed to his professional commitments, confident in the solidity of what he had built, believing that love alone could sustain any structure. He worked tirelessly during the week, but maintained the same affectionate gestures, the messages in the middle of the day, the notes left on the table, the invitations for short weekend getaways. He was a passionate and faithful man, with his soul devoted to the stability he so valued. And Lara, with her elegant posture and serene gaze, continued to play the role of wife perfectly, at least on the surface. She took care of the house, organized dinners, smiled in photos with family, made long-term plans. But inside her, something was silently disintegrating. Her relationship with the new director, Arthur, became increasingly intimate. The previously neutral and functional professional environment began to take on more intimate contours. A casual comment during a meeting would turn into a subtle compliment in the elevator. A long look at the end of a presentation would turn into a coffee for two under the pretext of discussing a project. Lara initially resisted the magnetism that Arthur exuded. She was aware of what was at stake, she knew the lines that should not be crossed. But there was something about this man that both disturbed and seduced her, the way he listened to her with genuine attention, the way he spoke with confidence, the way he made her feel special without effort, as if he knew exactly what she needed to hear to feel alive again. And while Daniel immersed himself more and more in his reports and financial strategies, Lara lost herself in the sound of a different voice, the smell of a new perfume, the desire to find herself again in the gaze of another man. The exchange of messages began discreetly, between spreadsheets and reports. During business hours, almost always professional, but with a frequency that increased every day. Little by little, inside jokes began to emerge, brief confidences, phrases that slipped into the personal realm. Lara didn't erase anything. Partly out of innocence, partly out of an unconscious desire to be discovered, as if that would free her from the guilt that was already beginning to eat away at her insides. There were nights when, next to Daniel, she felt her body present and her mind distant, lost in remembered conversations, in imagined touches, in restrained desires. And Daniel, even though he was present, didn't notice. He was satisfied with the status quo, with the impression that his effort was enough. He didn't suspect anything. He believed that their love was proof of time. One afternoon, after a long meeting, Arthur invited her to dinner after work, with the excuse of reviewing an important report before the final delivery to the board. Lara hesitated, but ended up accepting. They chose a discreet restaurant, away from the eyes of acquaintances. The dinner was light, full of smiles and conversations that flirted with the dangerous. And when he touched her hand across the table, with a slow and firm gesture, she did not take it away. It was as if, at that moment, she had made a decision without realizing it. A choice that challenged all the morals she had cultivated until then. She went home that night feeling strange, disturbed, with a bitter taste in her mouth and heavy breathing. Daniel slept, as usual, with the book by his side and the lamp off. She lay down, leaned against him, and for the first time in years felt that his familiar body was no longer a refuge. From then on, the meetings became more frequent. First in the company corridors, then outside office hours. Arthur was smart, skillful, he knew exactly how to advance slowly, how to surround her without seeming invasive. Lara felt desired, admired, alive. It was a feeling that tore her apart, because she still loved Daniel to some extent, but she no longer knew how to love in the same way. She was afraid of destroying him, of hurting him, but at the same time, she couldn't break the growing desire that consumed her. And then, the inevitable happened. On a corporate trip organized by the company, Lara and Arthur were assigned to represent the industry at a 3-day event. Daniel knew and encouraged, as he always did. I trusted her. She left with a divided heart, taking more than just clothes in her suitcase. She carried doubt and the feeling that something important would change. On the first night of the event, they had dinner with the rest of the team. On the second night, they were alone. The atmosphere was undeniable. They were in another city, in a relaxed environment, far from their routine commitments. She tried to resist, tried to maintain her composure, but she succumbed. It was a stolen kiss in the elevator that started it all. A hot, unexpected kiss, full of accumulated tension. And then, the hotel room. The private, silent space, where bodies spoke what words had kept silent for months. Lara knew, at that moment, that there was no way to go back exactly to where she had come from. Something had broken inside her. And no matter how much she tried to justify it to herself, Daniel's emotional neglect, the years of marriage, the stifled desire, the guilt dug its claws in. When she returned home, she could not look her husband directly in the eyes. Daniel finally noticed a subtle difference. A kind of emotional distance that he couldn't name. She was more introspective, less affectionate, somewhat absent even when they were alone. He tried to get closer, intensified his displays of affection, proposed a surprise trip to rekindle their relationship. She thanked him, smiled, accepted, and genuinely tried to reconnect. But the gap was already bigger than she could hide. The messages with Arthur didn't stop. The meetings, now more frequent, even happened on weekends, with vague excuses. And then, the invitation to the company party. It was an annual celebration, restricted to executives and their direct peers. Lara didn't mention the event to Daniel, thinking it would be better to avoid embarrassment. She said she had a conference at night and would be back late. But Daniel, while talking to a close friend who also worked at the same company, heard about the party. Something inside him clicked. An instinct, a mild suspicion. Without knowing exactly why, he decided to go there. Not like a suspicious husband, but like someone who senses, even if unconsciously, that something isn't where it should be. There was no public guest list, but he had enough contacts to get the address. He dressed simply, took a ride-sharing car and arrived at the venue. The room was lit with soft lights, background music and voices mixed in lively conversations. Daniel entered unnoticed, slipping between the groups of people toasting and laughing. He looked for Lara, not knowing exactly what he expected to find. And then, he saw it. Her back was turned, smiling, her hair loose and her shoulders exposed by an elegant dress. Arthur's hand rested familiarly on her waist. And then came the kiss. Slow. Unhurried. With the confidence of someone who didn't expect to be surprised. A kiss that left no doubt, a gesture that shattered everything Daniel believed he had. He froze. For a few seconds, he didn't breathe. Time seemed to stop. She turned around, her eyes met his. The world fell apart. The boss just widened his eyes, with the expression of someone who had just seen a ghost. And it was then that Arthur spoke, in a tense and surprised voice, "How did you manage to get in here?" Daniel kept his gaze steady, took a step forward and replied in a low, controlled but razor-sharp voice, "This problem is the least of your worries. Wait for me." And he turned his back, leaving the way he came, his heart in ruins, but his mind already tracing paths that would change everything. And at that exact moment, a plan began to form. A plan that no one there would have been able to foresee. In the days that followed, the silence was piercing. Laura did not try to make immediate contact, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of pride, perhaps because she did not know what to say after being caught so raw, with her body pressed against another man, her lips still damp from the forbidden kiss. Daniel, for his part, plunged into a state of icy restraint. It was not that he was calm, a hurricane was swirling relentlessly inside him, but there was something stronger than the urge to confront, the desire for justice. Not blind revenge, not shouting and slamming doors, but something meticulously thought out, intelligently constructed, precisely articulated. He moved away from routine, acted discreetly, used contacts, tracked, listened, investigated. And the more he discovered, the more the fire burned inside. The betrayal was just the surface of the iceberg. What was hidden beneath was much bigger, more rotten, more dangerous. And that was what he was going to expose. A week later, Laura showed up at home, her face drawn, her eyes sunken, dressed like someone who had left work in the middle of the day without thinking twice. Daniel was in the office. She came in without asking permission, stopped at the door and said her name in a broken voice. He didn't answer right away. He looked up coldly and remained silent for a few seconds. She insisted, asked to talk, said she needed to explain, that everything had gotten out of control, that it wasn't what he was thinking. He leaned back in his chair and told her to talk. But she said little. The words tangled together. She said it was a mistake, that she had let herself get carried away, that she didn't want to hurt him, that she still loved him, that she was confused, that it had only been a one-time thing, then hesitated, corrected herself, and admitted that no, it hadn't been just a one-time thing. Daniel listened, impassive. And then, in a firm voice, he told her that she should sit down, because now it was he who needed to explain a few things. She obeyed, hesitantly. The room was completely silent. He pulled a folder from the cabinet and placed it on the table, then opened a laptop and turned the screen towards her. Documents, records, graphs, emails, all arranged with cold mathematical precision. He then told her everything he had discovered in the last few weeks. The financial transactions within the company, the phantom contracts, the inflated commissions, the deposits in parallel accounts. But the most surprising thing was yet to come. With a slight ironic smile, Daniel revealed that 2 years ago he had acquired a majority stake in the company where she and Arthur worked, through a camouflaged holding company. He was the real owner, the hidden investor behind the company's rapid growth. He had never told her this because he had not seen the need. Until now. Lara's eyes widened, her mouth half open, unable to make a sound. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and said that kiss at the party had not only destroyed their marriage, but also exposed Arthur directly to his control. That the scandal that was about to come would not come from jealousy, but from compliance. That everything would be done cleanly, surgically, unquestionably. And that, contrary to what she could imagine, he would not do anything illegal. He would only use what was within his reach, and his reach was much greater than she could have dreamed. Lara tried to react, tried to beg, said that she knew nothing, that she had no part in the financial decisions, that she only worked there, that he could not ruin her career because of an emotional mistake. But Daniel did not shout, did not threaten, did not show anger. He only showed coldness, lucidity, and control. And he said that, for everything she had done, the least he could do was let her see with her own eyes the consequences of the choices she made. 2 days later, at an extraordinary meeting called by Daniel, the scandal was exposed to the company's board of directors. Arthur was immediately removed from his position, and within hours, the case was handed over to the authorities. His face appeared on news portals as a suspect in corporate corruption, embezzlement, and abuse of power. Lara, who had recently been promoted and received reports directly from Arthur, was also investigated. There was no arrest, but she lost her job. She was removed under suspicion of collusion, even though she claimed she had never known the details. Her colleagues distanced themselves, looks changed, doors were closed. Soon, she was unemployed, isolated, and trying in vain to defend herself on social media and in brief interviews that no one seemed to want to hear. She tried to get back in touch with Daniel, leaving him messages, long texts, emotional emails. She begged for a meeting, for a face-to-face conversation. She wanted to tell him that she loved him, that she regretted it, that it was all a mistake. That now she understood the value of everything they had. But he didn't respond. He disappeared from the radar. He disappeared from the networks, from their usual places, from their common circles. Lara found out, through an old mutual friend, that he had traveled. That he had bought a new house in another neighborhood. That he had started over. And what hurt her the most was knowing that he wasn't alone. Apparently, Daniel had met someone, a woman he had met on a professional course he took on weekends, even during the height of his marriage. There had been nothing between them before, but their friendship blossomed after the breakup. And now, according to what they said, they were together. She was a lawyer, intelligent, sweet, and, above all, honest. Lara didn't know it, but just knowing it existed was enough to hurt. Desperate, one day she went to her old house. She rang the doorbell, but no one answered. She cried in the car. She called again. No answer. A few days later, she ran into Daniel by chance, in a distant cafe, accompanied by his new wife. He saw her. Their eyes met. She approached, trembling, barely breathing. She said she needed to talk to him. He asked her not to cause a scene. She insisted. His new partner, with class, left for a moment, leaving the two of them alone. And then, right there, Lara broke down. She said she had lost everything. That she had no direction. That she couldn't sleep well. That her regret was physical, that her body hurt. That all she wanted was to go back. That she would do anything. Daniel listened, calm. He waited for her to finish. And then he said, with steady eyes and a low voice, that the man she had known no longer existed. That man had died the night of the party. And that she hadn't just lost a husband. She had lost the last man who loved her without reservations. Lara tried to take his hand, but he pulled away. He said he wished her peace, but that there was nothing more they could share. And when she asked, through tears, if he still loved her, he simply said, I loved someone who respected me. That person was not you. That afternoon, for the first time, Lara understood the real weight of the choices she had made. And he understood that there are things that, when broken, cannot be fixed. Because it wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal with consequences that no apology could erase. And the worst of all was knowing that the only one who could forgive her, had already left. Lara spent the next few days as if she were walking through a world she no longer recognized. The streets seemed emptier, the sounds more distant, the faces stranger. She carried with her the weight of something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't just regret, nor just loneliness. It was the suffocating certainty that she had broken something that she couldn't mend. Daniel's name came to mind at random moments, not as a sigh of longing, but as a deafening echo of everything that could have been. No matter how much she tried to rationalize the events, the guilt corroded her structure like silent rust that advances day after day, until one day the entire foundation collapses. There were no more excuses to offer, justifications to repeat, or hope to sustain. Still, something inside her compelled her to try one more time. It was then that she decided to step away for a while. She traveled to a distant aunt's house in the countryside, where the routine consisted of coffee in old cups, slow conversations and landscapes that seemed frozen in time. I wanted to breathe, I wanted to understand where everything started to fall apart. There, between the silences and the long nights, he began to write letters to Daniel. Letters he never sent. They were confessions, memories, guilt, requests for forgiveness that accumulated inside a box that she kept next to her bed. As I reread some of them, I noticed how much they were still addressing a man who no longer existed. A Daniel who had belonged to the past and who was now heading in another direction. And that hurt her in a new, more mature, deeper way. It was no longer about winning back. It was about accepting that I had destroyed what I most admired. Meanwhile, Daniel was consolidating his new steps in life. After the scandal, he distanced himself from everything that linked him to the old company and redirected his investments to more ethical and sustainable projects. He wanted to start over without carrying the debris of the past. His relationship with his new partner, Sophia, was evolving smoothly and unhurriedly. Sophia was different from anyone he had ever known before. She had an introspective but intense manner, and she spoke little but said exactly what needed to be said. They both shared not only the pain of unresolved stories, but a similar worldview, a silent commitment to not repeating past mistakes. Daniel was not looking for in Sophia what he had lost in Lara. On the contrary, he found in her what he never knew he needed: tranquility, trust, and above all, presence. One afternoon, months later, Lara returned to the city. She was thinner, her hair cut short, her gaze firm but dull. She had found out from acquaintances that Daniel would be giving a talk at a cultural center about corporate ethics and social responsibility. She decided to go. She didn't know exactly why. Maybe it was just the need to see him again, even if it was from a distance, even if they didn't exchange a word. She arrived early, sat in the back, trying to appear invisible. When he walked in, her breath caught. He was wearing a dark blazer, his shoulders broader, his eyes serene. He was, in fact, a different man. During the talk, she listened to every word as if he were speaking directly to her. When he finished, everyone applauded, and he was surrounded by greetings. She remained still until he saw her. For a second, time stood still. Their eyes met. But Daniel only nodded and went back to talking to the organizers. He didn't come any closer. That night, Lara walked aimlessly through the streets, feeling the city like a foreign place. She realized that all the roads that led to Daniel were now blocked off. And, for the first time, she didn't try to force her way through. But fate sometimes has curious ways of testing what seemed already decided. A few days later, Sophia was involved in a minor accident. A distracted driver ran a red light and hit the side of her car. Daniel rushed to the hospital, and although the damage wasn't serious, the shock left him shaken. It was there, in the hospital hallways, waiting for tests, that Lara appeared again. She had heard about the accident from a mutual friend. She was carrying a small basket with fruit and flowers. Daniel saw her from afar and felt a sudden wave of feelings that he preferred to keep dormant. She approached slowly, and for the first time in a long time, the two were face to face with no one around, without rushing, without masks. She offered him the basket, and he took it without looking directly at her. Lara said that she had heard the news and that, despite everything, she hoped that everything was okay. Daniel thanked her with a brief nod. Then, in an impulse that not even she expected, she said that she needed to confess something that she had never told him. He silently stepped aside and motioned for them to walk to a more private corner. They sat on a bench, near the internal garden. And there, with a trembling voice, Lara revealed something that Daniel could never have imagined. She said that, in fact, she knew who he was inside the company. She knew about the holding company, she knew about the shares, she knew from the beginning. A former co-worker, during a night of venting and drinking wine, accidentally told her. But she never said anything, because she believed that made her untouchable. That even if she made a mistake, he would never react harshly. She thought that his control would protect her, that love would prevent him from retaliating. Daniel didn't answer right away. He closed his eyes for a few seconds. He took a deep breath. When he spoke, his voice was low, but filled with a contained indignation that hurt more than any scream. He said that was the worst part. Not the kiss. Not the hotel bed. But the silent manipulation. The calculation. The fact that she had used his love as a shield for her risks. The coldness of someone who had bet on emotional impunity. He said that was what he couldn't forgive. Because it meant that everything was a farce that was older than he imagined. Lara tried to justify it. She said that she felt trapped, that she had lost herself. Daniel then stood up. He said that he was tired of hearing justifications. That no matter how much she sought redemption, his forgiveness was no longer important. That the hardest part of all was admitting that she, the woman he had loved for so many years, no longer existed. She tried to hold his arm, but he gently pulled away. He simply said, "It's not about hate anymore. It's about freedom. And mine, finally, no longer has your name." Laura watched him walk away through the plants, the white lights of the hospital reflecting off the walls. She sat there for a few minutes, listening only to her own breathing. And when he got up, he didn't cry. You knew it was over. Not just love, but the possibility of going back to being who she was by his side. He understood that life sometimes takes a heavy toll not because of the mistake itself, but because of the arrogance of thinking that someone's love is a safe place to hide from one's own choices. And deep down, she always knew. From the first gesture, from the first silence, from the first hidden kiss. She knew that the man who loved flowers, who wrote notes, who never stopped looking into her eyes, didn't deserve what she did. Across town, Daniel arrived home with Sophia. She was fine, with just one arm immobilized. They sat on the sofa, hugging each other. She asked if he was okay. He replied yes, and for the first time, he wasn't lying. He closed his eyes and felt that everything inside him had finally calmed down. There was no more anger, no desire for revenge, no open wound. Just the certainty that some endings are, in fact, new beginnings in disguise. And that, no matter how much it hurts, life always gives us back what we are able to sustain with truth. The morning after the meeting at the hospital, the city woke up to a light drizzle, the sky enveloped in grayish tones that seemed to translate exactly what was happening inside Lara. The streets dragged on slowly, people passed by in a hurry, each one absorbed in their own destinies. She walked alone through avenues that she used to cross hand in hand with Daniel, feeling that the world, despite moving forward, was off its axis. It was as if reality had lost its colors, and even sound seemed muffled, as if everything was being heard underwater. What was left now was a shattered landscape, and none of the broken pieces seemed to fit together anymore. For the first time, he was not seeking reconciliation. He didn't entertain fantasies. I was, finally, before the most brutal mirror, that of consequence. Lara did not return to her old apartment, nor did she seek refuge in familiar houses. He chose to rent a small studio in the center, with narrow windows and basic furniture. He wanted a place that reflected his new reality. Loneliness there was not imposed, it was chosen. And within that space of white walls, she began to rebuild what was left of herself. He sought therapy, started writing again, and tried to get back into the job market, even with the shadow of the scandal hanging over his reputation. The interviews were cold, the responses were formal, the looks were always a little suspicious. The public wound that Arthur had left when he fell dragged everyone who had been too close with him, and she, even though she had come out unharmed in court, carried the invisible seal of someone who had been on the wrong side. On the other side of this story, Daniel resumed his routine with a serenity that surprised even those closest to him. It wasn't indifference, nor was it pride. It was peace. A peace that had been achieved at a high cost, but that now manifested itself in small things, in the silent mornings with Sophia, in the walks at the end of the day, in the pleasure of cooking a simple dinner after years of outsourcing this gesture. Sophia, in turn, respected his time, understood his pauses, and didn't demand spaces that didn't yet belong to her. She knew that it wasn't about competing with a ghost, but about being by the side of someone who was slowly being reborn. And this maturity brought them closer together than any sudden passion could have done. It was during a rainy weekend, in a quiet coffee shop in the northern part of the city, that Daniel met up with an old colleague from the company's board. They talked about business and new projects, but inevitably Lara's name came up. The friend mentioned that she had applied for a position at a respected NGO and that, despite her initial resistance, her technical skills were being taken into consideration. Daniel listened without reacting, just sipped his coffee slowly, as if processing information that he still doesn't know exactly where to fit. When he left, he stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, feeling the cold wind blow on his face. He didn't think about interfering. For him, that story was already over. But there was a persistent thought, that even those who make irreparable mistakes still carry within them a part of humanity that deserves a second chance, even if it's not a second chance with him. Sophia noticed his restlessness that night. She didn't ask. She just sat down next to him, took his hand and stayed there, in silence. Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't missing Lara, nor doubt about the path he had taken. It was something harder to name. It was the understanding of how much a story can shape who we are, even when it's over. And it was on that threshold between past and present that he made an unexpected decision. He picked up his phone and wrote a short, direct message. I heard you're trying something new. I sincerely hope you succeed. No need to reply. Take care of yourself. He sent it. And deleted the conversation. Lara received the message as she was leaving the interview. He felt the ground slip away for a second. He read and reread it countless times. He didn't answer. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he understood that the message did not require a response. It was a silent blessing, a final gesture of someone who turned the page and wished, from the bottom of their heart, that she could do the same. That night, he slept for the first time in months without tears. There was no consolation, but there was a strange form of relief. Daniel still existed in her, like a scar, but it was no longer a prison. And that, in itself, was a starting point. Days later, she received the news that she had been hired. I would start as a project assistant, a modest but honest role. At the NGO, he met people with stories even more difficult than his. Stories of abuse, abandonment, injustice, and overcoming. And there, faced with other people's much greater pain, Lara began to give new meaning to her own. She stopped seeing herself as a victim of circumstances or as the villain in her own plot. She began to see herself as just human. And, strangely, that realization freed her. Meanwhile, Daniel and Sophia were preparing a short trip to the coast. It wasn't a honeymoon, nor a celebration. It was just a breather, a mutual gift. They walked along the sand at dusk, holding hands, talking about trivial things. And in that simplicity, there was something sacred. The absence of tension, of guilt, of secrets. Daniel smiled, observing the footprints they left behind, and thought he had finally understood what it meant to start over. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about carrying it with you like someone carrying a stone in their pocket, not to remember its weight, but to never forget the path. In another part of the city, Lara followed her new routine with dignity and silence. Little by little, the colors returned. A new haircut, a friendship born at work, a rediscovered taste for reading before bed. He was no longer looking for answers, nor validation. He knew that what he had experienced with Daniel would never be rewritten. But he also knew that, no matter how deep the abyss, there would always be a ledge to rest his feet on. And so, over time, the parallel stories that were once intertwined began to move in opposite directions. No glaring hurts, no forced reconciliations, no grand speeches. Just the acceptance that some people come into our lives to teach us about ourselves, even if the price of that learning is their own loss. But fate still had one last twist in store. And no one was prepared for it. Summer arrived bringing with it a strange calm, as if everything that had once been tension and noise had now dissolved into a silent and static heat. Months had passed since Daniel and Lara had last met, and time, with its cruel and precise ability, had tried to reshape each of them in different ways, molding their existence around new priorities, new people, new versions of themselves. Daniel was now walking a steady path, with a routine filled with activities that cultivated not only his intellect, but mainly his soul. His involvement in social and environmental projects connected him to causes greater than himself, and this gave him back a sense of purpose that had previously been lost among spreadsheets and coldly corporate goals. Sophia, always by his side, did not invade his silences, but filled them with presence and trust, and that was all he valued now, truth. Meanwhile, Lara began to reap the small fruits of a long and painful process of reconstruction. He no longer spoke to old friends in common, he didn't visit old places, he didn't feed nostalgia, but that didn't mean forgetfulness, but rather respect. The memory was alive within her, but it no longer dominated. The work at the NGO became more profound every day. She heard stories of pain that far surpassed her own, and this forced her to step outside herself, to put herself in the other person's shoes with an empathy that previously seemed distant. There, she understood that suffering, when it does not paralyze us, can become the most fertile soil for transformation. And it was this transformation, slow and steady, that now made her a completely different woman from the one Daniel had known, not better, not more worthy, just profoundly different. One day, at an event held by the organization where Lara worked, something completely unexpected happened. Daniel was invited to be one of the speakers. The institution, in an attempt to bring together leaders with careers marked by ethics and social impact, saw Daniel as the perfect fit. The invitation was made by a coordinator who was unfamiliar with the past between him and Lara. When she saw his name on the guest list, her stomach dropped. She could have left the event, but something inside her told her no. That she needed to see. She needed to understand what was left, if anything. On the day of the meeting, Lara maintained her professional demeanor. She dressed with discreet elegance, prepared the team's materials, and avoided any unnecessary approach. Daniel arrived on time, accompanied by Sophia, who was now his partner in a new urban sustainability project. They seemed relaxed, as if they shared a life of simple routine and profound lightness. During the talk, Daniel spoke passionately about the ethical challenges of the corporate world, about how moments of failure are opportunities to review values, about the importance of acting coherently even when no one is watching. Each word was a thin blade that passed close to Lara's thoughts, but it didn't cut like before. It hurt, yes, but it was a different kind of pain, the pain of knowing that he had become even more whole after everything, and that she was not part of this new wholeness. At the end of the event, as was protocol, all the team members gathered for a brief get-together. And it was there, with glasses of sparkling wine in hand and calculated smiles on their faces, that Lara and Daniel's eyes met again. She approached carefully, held out her hand firmly, and he shook it respectfully. There was no anger, no hurt, no longing, only recognition. He praised the event, she thanked him. She talked about how working there made her feel useful, and he responded with a simple, "I know," as if he saw the other person's effort without needing explanations. Sophia arrived shortly after, greeted Lara politely and without tension, and that, more than anything else, sealed the scene with an unexpected peace. For the first time, Lara felt that she could exist in the same space as Daniel without guilt, without wanting to go back, without pretending anything. It was just a meeting between two people who were everything to each other, and who now knew that they were just stories marked on their skin. Later that day, Sophia asked Daniel if he was okay, and he answered truthfully. He said yes, that seeing her like that, stable, mature, left him at peace. But he also confessed that there was a moment, at the beginning of everything, when he thought about destroying her completely. Sophia listened in silence, then said that loving someone includes accepting that certain wounds do not heal the same way for everyone. That the important thing was not to let the past stain what they were building now. Daniel then hugged her tightly and thought about how everything could have been different, but thankfully it wasn't. In the days that followed, Lara received a proposal to work as coordinator of a new international social impact project. A wave that demanded drastic changes, new country, new language, new life. And instead of hesitating, as she would have months ago, she accepted. Not as an escape, but as an advance. She wanted to start over, but now for herself, not to prove anything to anyone. In the weeks of preparation for the trip, he wrote one last letter to Daniel. Not to send it, that was already over, but to close the cycle within himself. In it, he thanked. She was grateful for having been truly loved, for having learned from pain, for having been forced to look within herself with brutal honesty. She even thanked him for moving away, because that was the only way she found herself again. On her last night in the city, Lara walked to the old park where they used to run on Sunday mornings. She sat on the same bench where they had once discussed children, the future, fear. The place was empty, the air warm, the sky clear. She closed her eyes for a moment and felt, at last, that this part of her life had been understood. Not erased, not overcome in the most vulgar sense of the word, but understood in its complexity, accepted in its pain, honored in its importance. That same night, Daniel was preparing dinner for Sophia. They were talking about plans for the next semester, about a trip down south, about the possibility of adopting a dog. At one point, he stopped, looked at the woman in front of him and said, in a low, confident voice, that he never imagined he would be able to love again with such serenity. Sophia laughed, held his hand and told him he didn't need to prove anything. That whatever he was at that moment was enough. He smiled. And he thought, with an almost poetic clarity, that sometimes losing is what saves us. And that some scars are not meant to be forgotten, but to remind us of where we never want to be again. And yet, there was something to come. One last piece, one last gesture, something that escaped everyone's eyes, but that would change, once again, the destiny of each of them. Lara arrived in the new city on a humid and misty morning, as if the sky there also carried part of the history she was leaving behind. The European capital where she would now live pulsed with a different energy, quieter, colder, but deeply welcoming to those seeking new beginnings far from old faces. The international project for which she had been selected required not only professional dedication like never before, but also emotional courage that, until then, she was not sure she had. Her apartment was small, on the third floor of an old building, with a partial view of a square with cherry trees. For the first time in a long time, Lara felt a peace that did not come from being next to someone, but from the deep feeling that she was in the right place, at the right time, with the right weight on her shoulders. She no longer cried, no longer begged for rescues. Now, she walked in a straight line, even without knowing exactly where that line would take her. At work, his leadership soon began to be noticed. She was firm, but without arrogance, she knew how to listen without judgment, she knew how to keep quiet when silence said more. Meetings with partners from different countries showed that it still had a lot to contribute, even after having been discredited in the past. The shadow of the scandal that nearly ruined his career seemed not to have crossed the ocean. But still, it was there with her, not as a threat, but as a living reminder of what she would never allow to happen again. Some nights, alone on the small sofa, Lara still thought about Daniel. Not with pain. With respect. It was like remembering a storm that left destruction but also cleared the sky. And even though his name was now just an echo, she knew, part of what she had become was because of the love she once received and because of the brutal fall she had experienced after betraying him. On the other side of the ocean, Daniel sealed a new cycle. His relationship with Sophia blossomed in stability. They didn't need to promise each other eternity, just the next day. They had learned that it wasn't time that sustained a love, but care, attentiveness, and the space given to each other to be exactly who they are. Together, they opened a foundation dedicated to environmental education and social impact, and between trips, conferences, and quiet afternoons at home, they built something solid without rushing. Daniel, now with a lighter countenance, maintained a firm posture in the face of the world, but he no longer needed to use rigidity as armor. That armored version he had created to survive the fall was no longer necessary. For the first time, he allowed himself to be vulnerable without fear of being hurt. Then, one night, when he checked his email, he found an unexpected notification. It was an invitation to participate in an international forum on business ethics and institutional reconciliation. There would be representatives from several nations, and among the confirmed speakers, Lara's name appeared next to his. For a moment, the mouse cursor hovered over the decline button. But something stopped him. He took a deep breath and accepted. Not out of curiosity, nor nostalgia, but out of conscience. He knew that her presence there meant that something had changed. And he was no longer a man who needed to run away from ghosts. The event took place 3 months later, in a packed auditorium, with an attentive audience and several authorities present. Daniel took the stage with the same confidence as always, but his eyes only scanned the audience once. She was there. Discreet. Her posture straight. Her hair tied up. No emotion on her face. When it was his turn to speak, he presented data, cases, proposed policies, and defended principles. At the end, he received sincere applause. Then it was her turn. Lara spoke eloquently and clearly. Her voice did not tremble. She recounted her journey without omitting her mistakes, but also without victimizing herself. She admitted, with rare maturity, that she had failed and that reconstruction was only possible when she stopped blaming the world and looked at herself with truth. The audience gave a standing ovation. And so did Daniel, sitting in the front row. At the cocktail party after the forum, the two crossed paths. For the first time in years, without shadows, without resentment, without invisible strings between them. They talked for a few minutes. He praised her speech, she thanked him. He asked if she was happy, and she said yes. She didn't need to say anything else. Daniel then wished her luck in her new project and turned to leave. But before she left, she said his name in a low voice, and he turned back. She smiled then, with serene sincerity, and said that she hoped he would never stop believing in love. He just nodded and walked away. Meanwhile, in another part of the world, Arthur was facing trial for his crimes. His attempt at reconstruction had failed. He tried to open consulting firms under the names of front men, he tried to go into exile in more permissive countries, but everything fell apart. The accusations continued unabated, and the names linked to him fell one by one. His face was splashed across news reports, but now he was not remembered with respect, but rather as an example of what should not be done. Isolated, without allies, he awaited the final sentence. Irony or justice, everything he once used as power had become his own trap. On the way home after the event, Daniel and Sophia walked to an old bridge, where the river reflected the city lights in small fragments of liquid gold. He said he had never felt so relieved in a conversation. Sophia smiled, rested her head on his shoulder and replied that sometimes you have to close a door by looking at it with gratitude, not resentment. There, without words, they understood that the next few years would be built not as an escape from the past, but as a celebration of the present. And that was enough. That same night, Lara watched the sky through her window with a glass of wine in her hands. There were no messages on her cell phone, no what-ifs, no emptiness. Just a discreet and lasting peace. In the morning, she would head to another city to expand the project. Life no longer expected her to solve anything. Now it was about action. About surrender. About continuing. And as the streetlights flickered in the distance, she closed her eyes and finally allowed herself to believe that starting over was, indeed, a possible place. And so, each of them, through different paths, found what they were searching for without knowing it. Some found peace, others justice, some love, others just the silence that heals. But all of them, in some way, were forced to face their truths, and this freed them more than any punishment, forgiveness or traditional happy ending. Because, in the end, life does not reward the perfect, but rather those who have the courage to change after making mistakes. Now I want to know from you, what did you think of this story? Which character impacted you the most? What part surprised you the most? Write here in the comments and I'll read everything. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now is the time. Every week we have intense, exciting and always real stories and feeling, showing how choices shape our destinies. And never forget, this channel does not support any type of betrayal. Here, we show the consequences, dilemmas and importance of loyalty. Until the next story.